Brandt DXT grain carts have efficient unload speeds, large carrying capacities, unmatched durability, and reliable components that make sure your cart is working when you are. Lead the field with DXT grain carts from Brandt. Visit your local Brandt dealer for more information.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio.
Hello and welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio Channel 147, Sirius XM. It is Wednesday, July 30th, and I am your host for the day, Lyndsey Smith. Thank you so much for joining me here on the show. Thank you so much for making Real Agriculture part of your day. I've got a really exciting show lined up for you today. I'm pretty pumped. We've got Brian Voth out of Manitoba with IntelliFarm. We haven't had him on the show in a while, and so I'm looking forward to catching up with Brian, hearing how things are going in Manitoba and, of course, in the commodity markets. We've also got Jason Deveau with the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Agribusiness is going to join later in the show to talk about a closed transfer system with pesticides and how it can reduce exposure. So Bern Tobin has that report from the Spray Expo that happened last week. I got to tell you, July has been just breakneck speed, I think. And we are rapidly approaching, of course, August, and I, for one, am here for it. I'm ready for a little bit of downtime and that pause we get in August before harvest really starts in earnest. So looking forward to that. But also on today's show, at the end of the program, I'll have the top news stories of the day. Plenty of things happening, some announcements, some travel happening with our ag minister. So Calvin Hepner will have that report. And I'll bring a few of the other things you can find, of course, at RealAgriculture.com. If you would like to receive an email to your inbox every single morning, you can customize what information you would like, whether you would like cattle or machinery and ag tech, or if you would just like a general Western or Eastern email, head on over, realagriculture.com/subscribe. You get all of our written content there, as well video and audio content as well, delivered right to your inbox. So go check it out. Also on today's show, Jane Underhill with JUWool.com. So it's Jane Underhill Canadian Wool Agency is her organization. I think this is probably a first. We don't talk a lot of sheep production here on this show. We certainly don't talk a lot about wool. But Jane is doing some really cool stuff out of Quebec and essentially filling the need for a value chain for wool processing. In Canada, she's working with some really top-notch producers and all the way through to the end users. And so I want to know how Jane is filling this niche and what the potential is, of course, for really reviving wool as an industry here in Canada, because of course I live in a part of Ontario that the old woolen mills are beautiful and everywhere, and it really does remind me of just how much wool North America used to produce and export and process and use, frankly, and we just don't anymore, and I want to know why. So Jane is going to answer those questions later in the show. All right, as always, if you've got feedback, and thank you to Paul and to Robert who reached out, and I had asked for feedback Monday. They did send their update. Unfortunately, not the greatest ones, definitely very dry, incredibly dry in parts of Alberta and Saskatchewan. And of course, here in Ontario as well, the central area, although some will call it east, I call it central, in the Lyndsey area, in other areas like that, really just hurting for rain. The corn is not looking great. Pastures are pretty crispy. So, if August could be kind and send a little rain, the pastures will say thank you. The livestock producers for sure will say thank you. And those soybeans will definitely say thank you. So thank you to all who sent in your feedback. My email, lsmith@realagriculture.com, or of course you can find us across social media. Drop us a DM and we'll get connected that way as well. Without further ado, let's take a break, and I'll be back with Brian Voth of IntelliFarm right after this.
Joining us right now is Mark Alberts. What do you do at BSF?
I'm on the Invigor Hybrid Canola marketing team based out of Calgary, Alberta, to really help bring the Invigor Hybrid lineup to market. The new hybrid, Invigor L355 PC, it's built for the mid to longer maturing growing zones, and it's going to have one of the strongest disease packages we've seen in the Invigor canola lineup so far, without sacrificing high yield potential and having all those things folks can rely on, like patented pod shatter reduction technology. We were talking a little bit about verticillium stripe and some of the other challenging diseases in Western Canada. Invigor L355 PC would have one of our top rankings in terms of verticillium stripe performance. Again, blackleg resistance, very strong standability and lodging resistance, and really going to be a winning hybrid in terms of the mid to long maturity zones for 2026. We don't want to have 100 hybrids in the lineup, but having the right amount that can suit those different growing zone disease challenges in Western Canada is really important. And the hybrids really are built to be more suitable for that. So there's not just one that you can say is the best across Western Canada. We really have a lineup that's going to be suitable for all the different areas.
If you're involved in the agriculture industry, it's important to stay informed on all the latest issues affecting your business. At RealAgriculture.com, we offer fast, reliable news, information, and insights to help you keep on top of all of the latest in Canadian agriculture. Visit RealAgriculture.com and sign up for our free daily newsletter covering everything from news, agronomy, animal agriculture, and much more. Visit RealAgriculture.com/subscribe today.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio, Channel 147, Sirius XM. This segment brought to you by FP Genetics. FP Genetics brings new seed genetics to Canadian farms, empowering growers to thrive in ever-changing conditions. Visit fpgenetics.ca and join thousands of Canadian growers who trust FP Genetics to deliver innovative, reliable hybrid fall rise seed genetics season after season. Experience the next wave. All right, joining me now is Brian Voth. He is president of IntelliFarm. That's IntelliFarm.ca. He's also a Manitoban and incredibly tall. Welcome here, Brian.
Thanks, Lyndsey. How are you today?
Melting. Thank you for asking. Ontario is in an absolute, it's a heater of a summer. Let's just put it that way. It has been melty. It has been humid. It's a good old-fashioned Ontario summer, as I've been told, which means I'm miserable. How has Manitoba been?
Quite comfortable, actually. I mean, it's been dry, which is, as you would know, a little bit odd here. We haven't even really had the, 6 weeks of sweltering humidity that we would normally have. Super smoky here again this week, so that's always pleasant. But my wife actually flew into Toronto yesterday, and she said, too, she got out of the airport, she's like, holy Hannah, it is hot out here.
So the air is wet, Brian.
Yeah.
Like you go outside and it's like, ugh. Anyway.
Well,
yeah.
Funny thing, like when we moved to Ontario and people said, oh, it's like so humid here or whatever. The first summer we were there was a dry summer. And I'm like, what's everybody complaining about? It's no different than Manitoba.
That's when I moved to Saskatchewan years ago, lived there for just over 3 years. And the first summer I was there, it was wet, like it rained. And I was used to Manitoba, so I was complaining. And everyone looked at me like I had horns because in Saskatchewan, you never complain about the rain. Yeah. Like never. Because sometimes the tap turns off and it never turns back on. Yeah. Never is a long time, but it could be years. Which, of course, brings us to part of our discussion. I was hoping for something super exciting to tackle today, but you work in the markets. How would you describe commodity markets these days?
What's the rating on this show? What kind of words can I use? You
have to use very family-friendly words.
Because that might play into my decision here.
Okay. It's family friendly. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Really, really dull. And it's been a bit of an abnormal, last 4 or 5 months because seasonally we would get a rally, into the first part of the year, January, February, then back off and then get another rally, usually into spring, summer, based on, seeding conditions, acreage reports, things like that, and then potential weather scares into summer. And then usually by July, end of June, something like that, we back off again until harvest. Well, we haven't done anything. We had the February rally, and aside from canola, which is maybe the one exciting topic to talk about, I guess, aside from canola, everything else has literally just slid lower since February. A few rallies here and there, but really not much has happened at all. And so that's why it's been so dull, because there just hasn't really been any good marketing opportunities since February. Canola aside.
Canola aside. Okay. So, and we will talk about canola in a moment, but now there's sometimes boring can be good, because sometimes boring means, hey, volatility means I'm not going to lose money, etc. But sometimes boring also means we're stuck with not great prices. So where are we at relative to where maybe some producers would like to be?
Well, from where producers would like to be, we're a long ways away, because the answer is always more.
More
and
higher.
Which is really not a good answer, because it's rather subjective too. But no, to me, I actually think we are bouncing off of the bottom right now. We're actually back to basically the same levels as last August, when we bottomed out and then started to move up. And if you go back, it's funny you mentioned that dull can be okay, because the alternative can be a little bit wild. And if you go, 2021 or 2020, 21, 22 was the polar opposite. And, and I remember telling some people, I'm ready for some precedented times again after that whole stretch.
Yes.
Well, I mean, now it's like, this is really dull, and we could have a little bit of excitement, but maybe not quite to that extreme again. So, but even back in 2022, 23, I remember having conversations with Sean and him asking where I thought things were going. These levels that we have right now, this is where I said we were going from 2 years ago already. And so when you look at the long-term cycles of markets, this isn't actually unusual that after a big price spike and a drop, you go sideways, and it could be for 3, 4, 5 years in a row.
Right.
And that is, so far at least, since we bottomed out last fall, that is exactly what we've done. And so in that sense, not really unexpected, but it doesn't make it any more interesting or exciting. It's just, we're now going sideways in a new range from where we were sideways between 2014 to 2020.
Right. Now, what I find interesting about at least some of this is that, at least commodity markets wise, kind of dull. But when we look at all the political wrangling, trade deals, trade agreements, back of the napkin stuff, all the volatility between Canada and the US, etc., and yet we have this dullness in the commodity markets. Do you have thoughts on that? Why do you think that is?
I would say the biggest thing comes down to that there's ample supply of grains around the world right now. And so there isn't this underlying concern like there was in 2020, 21 when the supply side got squeezed. Now it comes down more to demand. And that's what you're seeing, especially with the political stuff. You're seeing these demand trends shift. So, the historical patterns of typically China would be buying a lot of U.S. soybeans for October, November delivery. So harvest delivery out of the U.S. Well, that has been almost non-existent, but they have really ramped up purchases from Brazil. So these trade flows are being altered at this point anyways. And I think the bulk of that is because of this whole uncertainty. And I mean, it all kind of centers around one country, or one person in a country, I should say, I guess. And just the uncertainty as to what's going to happen going forward. And unfortunately, everybody else gets dragged into this dilemma then.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let us then talk about the one perhaps more interesting part of the commodity complex, canola. Where are we at as far as pricing, and where are we at as far as you said, the supply and demand shifts? Why is canola perhaps more interesting than some of the other commodities?
So canola is the one that is not in the excess supply situation. And interestingly enough, Stats Canada finally did update production numbers and whatnot from the last 3 years to account for the fact that based on the numbers that they were using, we would have this massive negative carryout, which is obviously mathematically impossible. And so production clearly had been understated for the last few years. And so they have to start going back and making these adjustments so that the math actually works. But demand has been phenomenal. We shipped the bulk of our canola oil south to the US. That does tie us into this whole trade issue because of all of the uncertainty around the biofuel policies and what was going to happen with canola oil coming from Canada. It does look like that's going to pass and it'll be fine and we'll be able to keep shipping stuff there. Then you drag in China and their tariffs. And this one is a really interesting one. When this all happened back in February, March, it seemed like everybody read this, they're putting tariffs on canola oil and canola meal. But everybody kind of read this as we're putting tariffs on canola.
Right. Not the same thing.
Raw canola seed was not included in this. And so then when you break it down, like China's a big buyer of canola meal, but they buy almost no oil. And so, it's like, well, they're not going to tariff the raw seed. Plus, when you look at their crush capacity that they have in China, it makes more sense for them to buy raw seed, ship it there, because A, it's easy, and B, they have their crush capacity. So, there was a lot of people that panicked, obviously, when canola dropped, and canola did drop on this news because it's a headline thing. Yeah. And, we kind of sat back and said, well, this doesn't make any sense when you look at the fundamental side and you look at the actual announcement, not just the assumption of, they're going to put tariffs on canola. Maybe they will at some point, but as of then and now, that's not the case. And so I think there was a lot of canola that got dumped, at the $13, $14 level in Feb, March, early April. And then we proceeded to rally to, $17 again. But it does highlight just how tight the canola market is. And that is not going to change. With our increased crush capacity here, exports are going to have to get rationed this coming year again. And anyone that has a crush plant is also an exporter. So they're going to prioritize crushing over exports because their crush plants can only do one thing. And so the exports are going to have to get rationed to an extent. So even if China were to say we're going to put a tariff onto canola, well, there wouldn't have been as much for them to buy anyways. Plus, I always go back to the situation that if China says they're putting tariffs onto something, they had no intention of buying it anyways. So it was going to happen regardless.
It's fascinating to see, exactly that. You read a headline and you think, oh, this is like super bad. And don't get me wrong. Yes, a tariff on all canola would be awful. But when you read the details, that's just it. When we talk about global markets and we talk about trade, like each component of canola, so there is seed, there is oil, there is meal, they are each their own thing that is traded. And so the details really do matter here. And exactly that. I think it is incredibly important to recognize sort of the posturing and the political side of what gets tariffed and what doesn't. And especially with China, like we've seen that with the US as well. China likes to make these announcements based on stuff they didn't need it anymore. And then it becomes, a bargaining chip that really isn't something to be bargained, right? So I don't know who's learning from who on this one. But there we go.
I've always said too, like China is very good at getting what they want on their own terms because they do have so much pull on the markets because of their demand side. As a Mennonite, I've also joked that I think China is probably the best Mennonites out there because we could all learn a lesson from them on how to get a deal. But that aside.
But do they have coupons, Brian? They need coupons.
Well, maybe we could introduce that to them. I don't know.
We should. Okay, yeah.
Canola coupons.
Not anyone not from Southern Manitoba will not get that joke. But it's really important to have a coupon. Anyway,
exactly.
It is true. They will. They're master manipulators at getting a really good deal. And I mean, and realistically, the economy the size that it is, that they can do that, right? It is. Now, I guess that brings us to, though, that second part of that discussion is looking ahead. And I'm not saying China's not about to be important because it always will be, or at least for the foreseeable future. But the discussion is that maybe it's not as strong an economy as it was. How does that shift things for Canadian commodities, do you think?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's always hard to try and put an actual analysis onto that because you start talking what if scenarios. And what if they stop buying? Well, then everybody's going to be in trouble. Because again, you look at their demand numbers and without them, and obviously they can't just not buy anything.
That's right. Yeah.
Because then people start starving, and then starving people in a country like that become very, very powerful. And so it's not like they would just exit the market completely. But what we are seeing again is these shifts. And, there are a few commodities, so canola being one of them, where they can't go buy canola in the amounts from anyone else that they can from Canada. Could they get some from Australia? Yes. But again, when you look at Australia having like a 6 million ton crop instead of 19 or 20, while their export capacity is just very limited. Same with the EU. Could they buy some from there? Yeah, probably. Ukraine, that sort of thing. But it's kind of like buying soybeans out of South America. Like it can be inconsistent, and the consistency is out of Canada.
Right.
Now, again, if they do put tariffs on, then to me, I look at it and say, well, they weren't going to buy it anyways. And if the price drops far enough, they'll buy it because, again, they recognize what a good price on the buying side is. So this really has been one to, for farmers to not let the emotional side get dragged into the decision making, not get caught up in these headlines and reading, everything that's going on Twitter and whatever else, and making decisions based on numbers and based on profitability. And that is going to get a lot tougher to do, given how a lot of areas look in Canada this year, because we're not, aside from canola, we're not a big enough driver on grain prices like the US would be, or Russia, where if they have a crop disaster, it will drive the world markets. We'll have some impact, but not that much. And so that's where, in a 2012 year where there was the massive drought in the US, we kind of got the best of both worlds because we didn't have the drought and we can tag along on the coattails on the pricing side. Mm-hmm. The really double whammy is when we have a crop issue and the US doesn't.
Yeah. Which maybe is a little bit what's happening this year. We'll see.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, a little bit. Not nearly to that extreme. I will note, because my friends here in Ontario would be very angry with me if I didn't say 2012 did hit Ontario. But Ontario, when we talk about crops, is a blip when we compare it to the U.S. and Western Canada. So, yes, you are all unique and beautiful butterflies and really matter. But corn, soybeans, wheat in Ontario is a blip when we compare it to the U.S. and the West. But I'll just note 2012, apparently. I didn't live here at the time, but it was very, very dry here. It was the last real drought for here.
Well, and again, when you look at how far Ontario extends south, that makes sense because until I lived there, I kind of just assumed that Ontario was straight east of me here.
Yes.
Which it is.
Yes.
Part of it.
East of you is what Ontario calls north. Yeah. And I tried to explain that to them, but they don't understand. It's like I have two heads. Anyway, okay. Brian Voth, IntelliFarm.ca. Thank you so much for joining me here on the show. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
All right. We'll be back with more RealAg Radio right after this.
The new Brandt XT grain cart delivers unmatched forward auger reach, side auger reach, and discharge spout clearance for easy positioning, with sight lines that allow you to actually see what you're doing while you're doing it, saving you time with each load and getting you back to the combine sooner. They say hindsight is 20/20. We say seeing what's in front of you is better. Lead the field with the new XT grain cart from Brandt.
The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com is a video series that showcases the latest in canola research and production agronomy. Learn from some of the best at your own pace through quick and timely producer-focused videos available on our YouTube channel. The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com is the quickest way to keep up to date on all the latest in canola production. Boost your canola IQ with the Canola School, brought to you by BASF, and visit canolaschool.com.
The Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com has everything you need to get your crop off to a great start and a strong finish. Whether you're growing chickpeas, faba beans, lentils, or peas, you'll get all the latest and best agronomic information at PulseSchool.com. A library of top-notch agronomy videos from industry experts available on demand at your fingertips. Visit the Pulse School, brought to you by BASF on RealAgriculture.com.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio, Channel 147, Sirius XM. I am your host for the day, Lyndsey Smith. It is Wednesday, July 30th, if you can't believe it. And this segment brought to you by Genesis Fertilizers. With volatile markets and rising costs, now's your chance to be part of the solution. It's time to secure your future with Genesis Fertilizers. Gain control and ensure access to locally produced nitrogen. Act now to protect your farm's future for generations. Visit GenesisFertilizers.com to learn more. We hop now to a report from the Ag Spray Expo that happened last week here in Ontario. You know, burn sure does travel a lot in the summer, and these few weeks have been no exception. We bring now this report, Jason Deveau with OMAFA, as I like to call it, and Bern Tobin talking about the closed transfer system and the difference it can make on pesticide exposure.
Bernard Tobin at the Ag Spray Expo, Jasper, Ontario today, catching up with OMAFA spray guy, Jason Deveau. Jason, how's it going?
Hey, Bern, doing well.
Hey, I want to talk about a term I haven't heard before, and you're talking about it today, pesticide closed transfer. A lot of people here are hearing it for the first time. Tell us about it and why it's important.
Well, it's exactly what it sounds like, closed transfer. The transfer of product from whatever vessel it's in straight into your sprayer, without any opportunity for you to see it, touch it, or spill it. And it's important because we've got to be safer. Everyone wants to be faster, for sure, but we've got to be safer. We're handling pesticide now, spraying longer in the year, using more product than we have before. And our regulatory agency is seeing some of the math maybe not as nice as we'd like it. And one of the ways to keep the potential for exposure down is to create a way for you to fill a sprayer without any possibility of touching it or spilling it.
What are the implications for operators, for growers, on what they're doing in the field today?
Well, it's surprising people to discover we've got 6 or 8, depending who you ask, products that already legally require closed transfer. So I hope you know what you're spraying, because you better read close. If you're traveling your product from IBC or bulk transfer, you're probably just fine. But the problem comes when we start using the small volume jugs, 10, 15, 20 liters. In that case, we need a way to get it out of the jug, into the sprayer, clean the whole thing.
Now, you talked today about solutions, and you're looking to Europe.
Yeah, I am. They've been battling this for the last 15 years. We have the luxury of the Great Lakes, so if we're unfortunate enough to spill a few drops, it goes through a pretty convoluted cycle and cleans it up a little. But there, everything that falls on the ground ends up pretty much surface runoff right in their drinking water, and rightfully they'd had enough. So they said, we need a way to get stuff out of the jug without any spillage at all. And they resuscitated an old idea, this closed transfer. But the trick wasn't that we get it out of the jug into the sprayer. The trick was getting all of the industries and all the agrochemical companies to agree on a standard that would do that. Now, over here, I'm afraid we don't have that right now. We do have something, though. This is Agritop's Easy Flow M system. It's just here on the ground. I won't bother showing it to you because the concept's pretty simple. The idea being, you take your jug, remove the cap, which already people are saying, well, that's not closed transfer. That's one of the warts on this frog right now. But let's imagine it has a foil. You screw on the adapter, invert the whole thing. That depresses and pops the foil inside. You lock it into the Easy Flow M. It drains out a partial load or a full, depending on what you're wanting to do. Rinse the whole thing. You pop it back off, and you're done. 99.9% clean, and everything in the sprayer in 2.5 minutes. Now, that sounds pretty slow with kind of a wrinkle in it. 2.5 minutes isn't quick compared to pouring or spiking. But you have to understand that where this was born in England, they don't have a lot of, bulk products. So they're putting 32 jugs in a sprayer. That's a lot of potential for drip. But we can do better than that.
You're looking at another option, right?
I am, and I'm really excited about it. This is the Easy Connect cap, and I think this is the solution. In a miraculous moment, all the agrochemical companies did agree to a standard. And what this cap does is it comes custom fit from factory already on the jug. It locks into the system. This is actually a prototype, the Pentair Nexus. Up comes this probe. It drains everything out into the suction of the sprayer. This is fitted under the induction bowl. Then it rinses the entire unit in 2 minutes. When it's done, you lock it down, turn this lever, and it cleans the connection on this sort of dry poppet style fitting, and you take your jug off. That's 2 minutes. The jug is 99.9% clean. The metering system is clean. The lines are clean. And not only is the jug recyclable, but over there now so are the caps. So no more taking caps off and kind of dealing with those. They get ground up for recycling just like the rest of the product. And as a result, they're saying 87% less operator exposure. That was an independent study that was done. And at 2 minutes a jug, it's on par or faster than most pours. So they're getting it done quicker and they're getting it done safer. And I think it's a great idea. All it takes is for the agrochemical companies on our side of the pond to get together and agree to adopt this format so that we can have any number of transfer systems.
Jason, what are you hearing from your contacts? Are we going to see some movement on this? Are we going to be able to sort of bring this system to Canada and make it work?
I'm really hopeful. I mean, just today at the Ag Spray Expo, I've had people from CropLife already come up and talk to me about how excited they are about this possibility. I think the agrochemical companies know that it's the right thing to do for a lot of reasons. It's kind of hard to change a system that's been the way it is for so long. But all I'm hearing is promise. The growers seem to appreciate that it's a good idea. Their safety is imperative, right? And fast is always nice. I'd like to think we're going to take advantage of 15 years of scrapping over in Europe and copy this thing exactly.
Great stuff, Jason. Appreciate you making some time for Real Agriculture.
Thanks, Bern, and thanks for coming to Ag Spray Expo.
Thank you to Bern and to Jason for joining me here on RealAg Radio on Rural Radio, Channel 147, Sirius XM. It is time for a quick break. And next you're going to hear from Jane Underhill. She's out of Quebec City, Quebec. And we are going to talk about wool, something that I don't know we've ever really talked about here on RealAg Radio. Check that out right after this.
I get to spend every day talking to farmers in the ag industry through RealAgriculture.com and RealAg Radio. But nothing is more fun than speaking to an audience live and in person. If you're planning an ag event, book a Real Agriculture speaker to make it a successful and memorable experience. Email shaney@realagriculture.com and you can book myself or any other Real Ag personality to speak at your event. Bring your audience all the fun, insight, and energy of Real Agriculture.
Peter Johnson at WheatPete, RealAgriculture.com. I'm the host of The Word, and I love doing The Word. I love the questions. I love the challenges. I love having to apply agronomics to all over the globe and areas outside of my normal jurisdiction. Also, I love the feedback the most, where growers challenge me, tell me about their plot results, help me to learn. The Word, absolutely the best part of my day.
Welcome back to Real Ag Radio here on Rural Radio, Channel 147, Sirius XM. It is Wednesday, July 30th, and I am your host, Lyndsey Smith. Joining me now to have what's sure to be a very interesting conversation, and one we probably have not done enough of here at Real Agriculture. It's Jane Underhill with Jane Underhill Canadian Wool Agency. She is the founder and president. Welcome here, Jane.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So, Jane, when I mention, as a sheep producer, that I have sheep, everyone says, oh, for the wool? To which I respond, no, for the meat. But wool is amazing, and I wish we could do more with it. And you, Jane, are someone who is actually doing more with it. So give us, before we sort of delve into that market, give us a snapshot of what it is you do with your company in the wool industry here in Canada.
Thank you for the question. So my company, JU Wool, is what I kind of how I describe it in a shorthand version, is an agency that responds to real world needs in wool, in Canadian wool. So we have 4 basic services. The first one is white label manufacturing, and that's where we take products. You'll edit, right?
Yep.
You'll edit.
Yep.
That's where we take wool and move it into the supply chain for customers who want blankets, upholstery, carpets at a commercial volume. We do research and development projects where we help innovators, government agencies, legislative bodies try and understand and work to grow the Canadian wool industry. We offer a brand new wholesale knitting yarn manufacturing segment. Recently, we have created a whole collection for retailers, artisans, designers who are starting out in the wool industry, who have who can't really meet the high minimum order quantities of our white label manufacturing and our private label manufacturing. This is an opportunity where we can consolidate orders from several small businesses to meet the commercial manufacturing MOQ, but it's done in a more reasonable scale. But I do wool marketing too. So there's the 4 things. And most importantly, this is where we work with farms to improve the value of the wool at the farm gate. This doesn't involve changing how sheep are managed on farm. It involves looking at shearing and wool handling protocols, how the wool is sorted and packed, and that goes a long way to helping the wool coming into our value chain.
Now, you mentioned right off the right off the hop, and I think this is a really important point, is that your business is focused on meeting a need that exists. And I think for many of us in the sheep industry, wool has almost become a four-letter word in a bad way, in that we have a lot of, costs associated with shearing our sheep, maybe shipping that wool, and we haven't necessarily seen the value in it. And yet so many of us certainly feel like it is such an amazing product for what it can be used for, and you've highlighted some of those things. But there just hasn't necessarily been, and I get this a lot from people who are saying, well, why can't you just ship it to here? Why can't you just make it into yarn? And so I firsthand have experienced sort of this major gap in the market. So how does this come to be for your company? Do people come to you and say, I've got an idea, here's what I want to do with it? Or do companies come to you and say, I have a need for, a renewable fiber and I need to source it? Is it all of the above? How does it work?
Well, I'm really proud to say that we have partners across the value chain. So yes, we have producers coming to us. Yes, we have innovators coming to us. Yes, we have retailers, hotels, government procurement agencies that are looking to tell a different story in the products that they're making. And I happen to know that we have an exceptional quality of wool in Canada. And the rhetoric I think that we've been fed over the years that Canadian wool isn't worth anything is a myth. And I've written about this extensively. We have lost certain skills in preparing and handling that wool. We've lost a skill set of knowing how wool works. But that doesn't mean the wool in itself doesn't have value. And so there is as much a psychological obstacle to get over as there is just in making a few adjustments on farm. And then when we improve that wool quality coming into the supply chain, I have a wide array of paths that wool can go down to bring value back to the farm.
You mentioned yarn, obviously. I mean, when we think wool, we think wool sweaters, we think wool socks. But to me, wool was replaced by plastic, essentially, right? By nylons and different plastic fibers.
Correct.
And I think about wool, I think about upholstery, I think about anywhere we use plastics, really, in car parts, in carpets, in everywhere from I think very high end all the way to very utilitarian, incredibly tough, durable things. What right now is driving a lot of your business as far as the products that are being sought after to include wool?
Oh, that's such a good question. I believe that our wool is in the micron range and the quality is well designed for home interiors. So I like home interiors for a couple of reasons. One is we use up a lot of wool. We're able to move large volumes of wool off farms. We're able to move it into commercial processing. That requires a higher volume of wool, but the efficiency coming out of processing makes it a more affordable product. And it is what gives us the margin so that everybody in the value chain makes a bit of money. I guess, sometimes I guess we're afraid to use the term money, but it is about money. We're in business.
We need to be
We're
profitable.
in business.
Yes. And that's okay.
And the mini mill systems are great for the artisanal approach, for the one-off special project. But for me, the timelines and the cost, the price point, I need to use commercial. And I need to move a lot of wool off farms because I want to relieve that stress for our producers. And taking 200 pounds of wool off of a farm doesn't make a dent when your barn is full of wool bags. So I want to be able to move as much wool out as possible. This is why carpets, upholstery, bedding, I find wonderful. There are new innovations happening with industrial products that could be in the agriculture space, in the construction space, in the roadwork space. I like wool for those applications, but the price tolerance, typically we want to make really economical construction materials. That's not going to be Canadian wool. Mm-hmm. This is where I see a bit of a disconnect in the industrial space. There's still more R&D to do to see if we can produce industrial products using Canadian wool so that it's affordable for everyone. But certainly we can do luxury home goods where there's more price tolerance, more opportunity to sell, a wider audience for those products. We have a lot of versatility. We can make very interesting products using a customer's color palette, design, something that matches their value and their vision, and all with Canadian wool, which actually, when it is produced through proper commercial means, is an incredibly soft, luxurious fiber.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned, some of the changes that a producer could make to ensure the value of that wool as the commodity, as the beginning point of a value system. We hear often, as producers, we might hear about breed selection, but also we hear about things like feeder setup and even just, how we skirt that wool, etc. How much of that conversation happens with the farmers that you're working with? How much have they had to change, or is it not a lot that they've had to change to ensure the quality of the wool going to some of these projects?
I would say that there is less change than a producer might believe. My philosophy is that we are not going to be changing how you raise your sheep. Whether the animals are raised indoors or outdoors, whether they're on accelerated lambing or an annual lambing, I trust our producers to know what's best for their flock. Where I step in is to say, when you're shearing, let's try and avoid second cuts. That's my responsibility to work with the shearing industry, especially new shearers coming into the market, to make sure they know how to shear for wool quality, not just for health and safety of the animal, but also improving their technique so that the fleece is coming off the animal in a proper pattern. And then we work bagging. I would say the biggest change I've asked producers to make is to use square tote bags rather than sausage bags for their wool. Already, we can pack those bags, those square totes, in a trailer much more efficiently. Right away, we're saving so much money just by that packing. And learning a bit of skirting, doing a more aggressive skirting, knowing what pieces to take off. Because ultimately, you can fill your bags with all the wool that's coming off your animal, but somebody else is going to have to skirt it off at scouring, and I'm going to have to pay for that service. So you can help me by skirting off the stuff that's not going to be premium fleece and keeping that separate. And there's a use for that less than premium wool. We can find a use for that. But it helps us so much just to put the right wool in the right bags.
Mm-hmm. Simple steps that make a big difference down the entire value chain.
It is unbelievable when I start breaking down the costs. We've done some studies over the last couple of years that say, on average, it costs about $1.52 per pound to shear an animal. That doesn't include the feed to raise them, but that includes on shearing day, having a shearer, feeding them, having a hired hand to help with the skirting and sorting, right through to the sack, the wool tote, $1.52 a pound. So that puts a lot of pressure on me to be able to create efficiencies elsewhere in the supply chain, so I make sure that we can get you your $1.52 a pound and better.
Right.
It's going to be a work in progress when we bring new farmers on. There's an education. We can't be paying top dollar right out of the gate, but we'll get there quickly. And the more collaboration and belief that we have in the producer, the quicker that'll go.
All right. Jane Underhill, we could probably talk all day, but I am limited by this is only a 1 hour radio show. And so I want to send a shout out, juwool.com. That is
juwool.com. Yes.
That is your site. Everyone, go check it out if you've got questions for Jane, ideas, etc. And if perhaps you're someone who wants to be part of that value chain, you can always reach out. Jane, thank you so much for joining me here on RealAg Radio. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Big thank you to Jane Underhill. That's juwool.com if you're interested. Would love your feedback on this interview. And of course, anything else we cover here on RealAg Radio, you can send me an email, lsmith@realagriculture.com. We're going to take a quick break and I'll be back with more RealAg Radio right after this.
Built on over 100 years of seed innovation and unwavering commitment to farmers, Pioneer 100 Series canola hybrids deliver a step change in yield performance and agronomic traits. This isn't just better canola, it's different canola. Pioneer 100 Series. Contact your local Pioneer sales representative or visit pioneer.com/100 series to learn more today.
It's summertime, and you've got a lot of important decisions to make when it comes to your corn crop. Let the Corn School on RealAgriculture.com help guide you through those big decisions with input from leading experts in the field. If it's spray timing, disease identification, or any other field issue, the Corn School's got you covered. The Corn School on RealAgriculture.com. Brought to you by BASF and Pride Seeds.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio, Channel 147, Sirius XM. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith. It is Wednesday, July 30th. And as promised, some top news stories of the day. Shout out to Brendan Burney, who some of you listeners may recognize that name. He, of course, is a part of the Farmer Rapid Fire every now and again. Farmer from Southern Ontario and past chair of Grain Farmers of Ontario. Brendan has been named as chair of the Ontario Farm Products Marketing Commission, effective yesterday, which is super cool. He replaces Amy Cronin, a poultry and hog producer from near Listowel, Ontario, who has served for the past 5 years. So always exciting news when we've got familiar faces and names in the news. Also, if you listen to RFD TV or watch it, you would have seen me this morning on the show. We do a hit at 11 a.m., and I've got one of those coming up here shortly. But after 22 years since the finding of BSE in Canada and the U.S., Australia has opened its market to chilled and frozen Canadian beef after seriously like a decade of back and forth consulting, proving our traceability, our biosecurity, and food safety systems. Now, will this announcement that beef can move into Australia be a huge boon for the beef industry? Probably not. Australia is not a huge importer of beef. At the same time, in an age where we're dealing with more trade restrictions, freer and more open trade is always a welcome thing. Now, this does come on the heels of the U.S. also being approved for more imports into Australia. This all stems from the 2003 finding of a BSE positive case in Canada, and then, of course, following BSE positive cases in the U.S. So there was a full ban then, and then years later there was a partial lifting of that ban. But this latest announcement is essentially a full lifting for chilled and frozen beef into Australia. So good news. What it actually ends up being, we shall see. But frankly, at this point, more access is better than less access. Isn't that the case? All right. As promised, and as I mentioned earlier, further to Australia and that area of the world, including the Indo-Pacific region, Kelvin Hepner was on RFD TV yesterday on Market Day Report, and he has this report on our federal ag minister, Heath MacDonald, heading to the region on trade mission.
Well, Canada's new ag minister, Heath MacDonald, he's heading out on an Indo-Pacific trade mission. Kelvin Hepner with RealAg Radio joins us now. Kelvin, thanks for being here. So tell us where he's headed. That's a big region.
Yeah, it is a big region, and of course a major market that both Canada and the U.S. are focused on. Last week we saw President Trump announce the framework deal with the Indonesian government, and Minister MacDonald's stops here over the next week include Indonesia, Singapore, and the Philippines. Canada opened up an ag trade office in Manila last year, the capital of the Philippines. He's planning to visit that office. He also hinted at potentially opening another Canadian delegation or diplomatic office presence for agricultural trade exports in the Indo-Pacific region in an interview with Sean Haney just last week on RealAg Radio.
So, Kelvin, the reason then behind this trip, some goodwill, getting some face-to-face time, and maybe getting a stronger foothold in that region?
Certainly, yes. Those are the top line priorities in terms of what Minister MacDonald is doing in the Indo-Pacific this week. There is also a huge appetite right now in Canada to diversify Canada's ag export markets. We know the U.S. will always be Canada's largest market, but of course, with the pressure from the Trump administration in terms of tariffs and this August 1st deadline that is looming, there's an appetite both politically and I'd say among the Canadian public to diversify trade elsewhere. That's something that our agriculture sector in Canada and the U.S. has focused on for decades. But that, of course, that Indo-Pacific region, lots of potential, and Minister McDonald says he's hoping that Canada can be right there with the U.S. when it comes to working on improving that trade relationship. U.S. in Indonesia, Canada also looking to build that trade relationship with Indonesia. Just last year, late 2024, under the previous Trudeau government, the Canadian government actually said it concluded negotiations on a trade agreement with the Indonesians, and now we have uncertainty as to where that deal is at, and again, coming on the heels of last week's announcement by President Trump that the U.S. has an agreement with the Indonesian government.
So, of course, a lot of folks taking a little bit of a pivot to diversify and strengthen, of course, their ag economy as well. From what I understand, McDonald has yet to meet with Secretary Brooke Rollins. Is that something that's going to be down the line as Canada and U.S. trade continues?
It's certainly, I'd say, a surprise that they haven't talked to this point with the emphasis that there is right now on Canada-U.S. relations, especially from the Canadian trade perspective. Certainly, a lot of these trade talks are being run through the highest of levels between the White House and Prime Minister Mark Carney's office and Canada's ambassador to the U.S., Kirsten Hillman, being run through there. So I'm assuming, or we're reading between the lines, likely Minister McDonald has been directed to kind of stay out of it for now. But at the same time, there are many things that Canada's Ag Minister and the U.S. Ag Secretary could talk about outside of trade. There's all kinds of other issues that are less controversial where they share perspectives that they could be working on. So it's a bit of a surprise, and certainly lots of focus here north of the border on this August 1st deadline that is looming, as President Trump has said that Canada will likely face tariffs. There may not be a deal for Canada. We heard yesterday from Prime Minister Carney saying that negotiations are in intense phase, I believe was the quote that he used yesterday to describe where things are at right now in terms of bilateral talks.
Intense phase, and it's got us all, of course, holding our breath right now. Kelvin, thank you. As always, we appreciate your team.
In more local news and more agronomic focused, if you listen to Wheat Pete's Word that went live today, so Peter Johnson, who joins me every Monday, usually, for Agronomic Monday, does his own podcast called Wheat Pete's Word. You can find it wherever you get your audio. It goes live every Wednesday. And in today's episode, a troubling finding of a positive ID of Palmer amaranth being found in Lambton County in southern Ontario. So Palmer amaranth is an incredibly noxious weed. I know many of our American listeners are probably dealing with that weed. And so we do have a positive ID in Lambton County that is new. Not ideal, everybody. This is a weed that requires an incredible amount of attention, management, and multiple choices when it comes to herbicides for effective control. So please get scouting, everyone. We've also, of course, had the spread of water hemp, which is also a difficult weed to control. That was part of our discussion on The Agronomist on Monday night. You can check that out on YouTube as well, just looking at where some of these really terrible weeds are spreading to. So get out in those fields and get looking. All right. Okay, that does it for today's show. Thank you, of course, to Jason Deveau and Bern Tobin, to Jane Underhill, and to Brian Voth for joining me on today's show. Really appreciate all the insight and the time that people offer up to us so that we can bring you Real Ag Radio day in and day out. Tomorrow, of course, Sean Haney back with the Farmer Rapid Fire. And then Friday, I'll be back, as will Calvin, for the issues panel. You'll also hear the beef market update with Ann Wasco. So we'll talk to you then on Friday, 4:30 Eastern, right here on Rural Radio, Channel 147, Sirius XM. And of course, you can always get in touch with me, L. Smith, at RealAgriculture.com. Cheers, everybody.